In the summer of 1940, the world watched as Nazi Germany seemed unstoppable. Hitler's armies had swept through Europe with lightning speed, using the devastating tactics of blitzkrieg to conquer Poland, Belgium, the Netherlands, and finally, France. Britain now stood alone, isolated and vulnerable, as the last major power in Europe resisting Nazi domination. For many, it seemed only a matter of time before Hitler would launch his invasion of the British Isles, bringing the war to British soil. But Britain had one final line of defense: the Royal Air Force. The fate of the nation rested in the hands of a small, determined group of pilots, engineers, and strategists who would face the might of the Luftwaffe, the largest and most powerful air force in the world. The Battle of Britain was about to begin, and its outcome would not only decide the future of the United Kingdom, but the fate of the entire free world. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If Britain fell, Nazi Germany would gain complete control of Western Europe, and the path to global domination would seem inevitable. The United States, still neutral at this stage of the war, might be unable to stop Hitler's advances. The Soviet Union, engaged in its own brutal struggle with Germany on the Eastern Front, might find itself fighting an enemy that had no distractions in the West. The freedom of millions hung in the balance. But how did Britain, a nation still reeling from the evacuation of Dunkirk and the loss of its European allies, manage to stand firm against such overwhelming odds? What strategies, technologies, and individual acts of courage made it possible to hold back the seemingly unstoppable Nazi war machine? These are the questions that defined the Battle of Britain. A battle fought not with tanks and trenches, but with planes, radar, and the indomitable will of a nation refusing to surrender. The Battle of Britain would become the first major campaign in history fought entirely in the skies. It was a fight for survival, and the story of how Britain stood alone against the Axis powers is one of courage, resilience, and ultimately, triumph. Over the next few months, the skies above Britain would become a deadly battleground, and the outcome of this air war would change the course of history forever. By the time the Battle of Britain began in the summer of 1940, the situation in Europe was dire. After the fall of France in June, Britain found itself standing alone against the Nazi war machine. The evacuation of over 300,000 British and French troops from Dunkirk had been a temporary reprieve, but it left much of Britain's army without the heavy equipment they had left behind. With the Germans occupying France, Hitler now turned his attention to the British Isles. Initially, Adolf Hitler did not want to launch a full-scale invasion of Britain. He hoped that the British government, realizing the futility of resistance, would agree to negotiate a peace settlement. But Prime Minister Winston Churchill was not willing to capitulate. In his famous speech to the House of Commons in June 1940, Churchill declared that Britain would fight on, saying, "We shall never surrender." With no diplomatic solution in sight, Hitler ordered preparations for an invasion of Britain under the codename Operation Sea Lion. However, before any invasion could take place, Germany needed to gain control of the skies over Britain. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, had played a crucial role in the success of blitzkrieg in Europe, providing air support for ground forces and bombing enemy defenses into submission. But to successfully invade Britain, the Luftwaffe would need to achieve air superiority by destroying the Royal Air Force and its airfields. The stage was set for a different kind of battle, one fought entirely in the air. The RAF was Britain's primary line of defense. Though they were vastly outnumbered by the Luftwaffe, the British pilots were well trained and supported by cutting-edge technologies like radar. The British government also implemented strategies to conserve aircraft and pilots, knowing that both would be in short supply if the conflict dragged on. On the German side, Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, was confident that his forces would crush the RAF quickly. He planned a series of aerial assaults that would pave the way for Operation Sea Lion. In July 1940, Göring launched Operation Eagle Attack, the Luftwaffe's attempt to destroy the RAF and its infrastructure in southern England. The battle for Britain's survival had begun. On August 13, 1940, the Luftwaffe unleashed the full force of its air power against Britain in what would become known as Adlerangriff, or Operation Eagle Attack. The objective was clear: destroy the Royal Air Force and prepare the way for an invasion. The Luftwaffe's plan focused on hitting airfields, aircraft factories, and radar stations, aiming to cripple Britain's ability to defend itself from the air. The first wave of attacks targeted southern England, where many of the RAF's fighter bases were located. German bombers, escorted by fast-moving Messerschmitt Bf-109s, swarmed the skies, facing off against British pilots flying Spitfires and Hurricanes. These dogfights would become some of the most iconic images of the Battle of Britain, with both sides taking heavy losses in the struggle for control of the air. For Britain, the stakes were incredibly high. The RAF was heavily outnumbered, with fewer pilots and planes than the Luftwaffe. But what the British lacked in numbers, they made up for in strategy and resilience. The RAF's fighter command, under the leadership of Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, had developed a highly effective air defense system that relied on early warning from radar stations along the coast. This allowed the RAF to scramble its fighters in time to intercept incoming German raids, preserving resources and maximizing their effectiveness in battle. As the battle intensified, the RAF faced tremendous pressure. Airfields were bombed repeatedly, and ground crews worked around the clock to repair damage and keep planes operational. British pilots, many of whom were barely out of their teens, flew multiple missions each day, battling exhaustion as well as the enemy. Yet despite the relentless German attacks, the RAF held its ground. Each day, more and more Luftwaffe planes were shot down, and the German losses began to mount. Still, the situation remained critical. The Luftwaffe continued to press its attacks, and by mid-August, the RAF's resources were stretched to the breaking point. Hitler and Göring believed that Britain's defeat was only a matter of time. However, the RAF's resolve, combined with key tactical errors by the Germans, would soon turn the tide in Britain's favor. One of the most significant moments of the battle came when the Luftwaffe shifted its focus away from bombing RAF airfields and radar stations. In a move that would prove to be a strategic blunder, Hitler ordered the Luftwaffe to begin bombing British cities, particularly London, in an effort to break the morale of the British people. This shift in tactics, which would later become known as the Blitz, relieved the pressure on the RAF, allowing them to regroup and rebuild their defenses. By the end of August 1940, it was clear that the Luftwaffe had failed to achieve air superiority. The RAF had not only survived, but had inflicted heavy losses on the German Air Force. The tide of the battle was beginning to turn, and Britain's skies remained unconquered. As the Battle of Britain raged on, several key factors began to tilt the balance in favor of the Royal Air Force. Perhaps the most crucial of these was Britain's innovative use of radar technology, which gave the RAF a significant advantage in detecting incoming German raids. The radar network, known as Chain Home, stretched along the southern and eastern coasts of England, providing early warning of Luftwaffe attacks. This system allowed Fighter Command to deploy its limited number of aircraft more effectively, ensuring that RAF pilots were in the air and ready to intercept the enemy before they reached their targets. Radar wasn't the only advantage that the RAF had in its arsenal. The leadership of Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding was another critical factor in the defense of Britain. Dowding's strategic approach was built on conserving resources and focusing on winning the war of attrition. He understood that the RAF could not afford to engage the Luftwaffe in constant battles across the length of the country, so he developed a system of regional command and control that allowed the RAF to respond where it was most needed. His Dowding system effectively integrated radar stations, ground observers, and fighter squadrons, creating a coordinated air defense network that could quickly respond to threats. Despite these technological and strategic advantages, the heart of Britain's defense rested on the courage and determination of the RAF pilots themselves. Winston Churchill famously referred to these men as the few in his speech after the battle, stating, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." These pilots, often outnumbered and facing overwhelming odds, took to the skies day after day, knowing that the fate of their country rested on their shoulders. The RAF pilots were a diverse group, with many coming from Commonwealth nations, including Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. Others came from occupied countries like Poland and Czechoslovakia, determined to fight back against Nazi tyranny. Their collective effort in defending Britain's skies was nothing short of heroic. Many of these young men were flying multiple sorties a day, often with little sleep and under intense physical and emotional strain. Yet, their resolve never wavered. As the Luftwaffe intensified its bombing campaigns, the RAF's defenses grew stronger. German losses mounted, with many of the Luftwaffe's best pilots shot down in the escalating dogfights over the English countryside. While the Germans still had the numerical advantage, the RAF's superior tactics, use of radar, and determination began to take their toll on the Luftwaffe. By September 1940, the Luftwaffe had failed to break the RAF. The British Air Force had not only survived, but had proven its ability to defend the nation against one of the most formidable military forces in the world. The tide had officially turned, and Britain had won a decisive victory in the skies. Frustrated by the Luftwaffe's failure to achieve air superiority and destroy the RAF, Adolf Hitler and Hermann Göring shifted their strategy in early September 1940. Believing that bombing British cities would crush civilian morale and force the British government to surrender, they began a campaign of sustained bombing raids on London and other major cities, an effort that would come to be known as the Blitz. The Blitz began on the evening of September 7, 1940, when the Luftwaffe launched a massive attack on London. Over 300 German bombers, escorted by fighter planes, rained bombs on the city, targeting both industrial and civilian areas. For the next 57 consecutive nights, London was bombed relentlessly. Other cities such as Birmingham, Liverpool, and Coventry were also hit hard in the following months as the Luftwaffe sought to break Britain's will to fight. However, this shift in strategy proved to be a miscalculation on Hitler's part. Instead of weakening British resolve, the bombing campaign only strengthened it. Civilians, forced to take refuge in underground shelters or endure sleepless nights during air raids, showed remarkable resilience. The Blitz became a symbol of Britain's stiff upper lip and determination to endure. Far from breaking the country's morale, the relentless bombing raids solidified the resolve of both the civilian population and the military to continue the fight. For the RAF, the change in German tactics provided some relief. The Luftwaffe's focus on bombing cities meant that British airfields and radar stations, which had been targeted heavily in the early stages of the battle, were no longer the main focus. This allowed the RAF to recover, repair damaged airfields, and replace lost aircraft. The respite gave Fighter Command the breathing room it needed to regroup and prepare for further German assaults. As the Blitz continued, the Luftwaffe found itself increasingly overstretched. The longer-range bombers used in the raids were vulnerable to RAF interception, and as the Luftwaffe's losses mounted, the effectiveness of their attacks diminished. By October 1940, it was clear that the Luftwaffe had failed to deliver the decisive blow that Hitler had hoped for. On October 12th, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely, effectively abandoning his plans for an invasion of Britain. The final phase of the Battle of Britain saw the Luftwaffe continuing sporadic bombing raids on British cities, but by the end of October, the large-scale raids had subsided. The RAF, having successfully defended the skies over Britain, had won a critical victory. By the end of the battle, the Luftwaffe had lost nearly 1,900 aircraft, while the RAF had lost around 1,500. Though the human and material cost of the battle was high, Britain had survived. The Battle of Britain was not only a military victory, but a psychological one, proving that the Nazis were not invincible and that the tide of the war could be turned. The Battle of Britain stands as one of the most pivotal moments in World War II, a battle in which the fate of a nation, and indeed the free world, hung in the balance. Against overwhelming odds, Britain stood firm, with its survival resting on the courage of the few, the RAF pilots who took to the skies to defend their homeland from Nazi invasion. In the face of the Luftwaffe's might, Britain's victory in the Battle of Britain not only prevented a German invasion, but also delivered Hitler's regime its first major defeat of the war. The battle demonstrated the importance of air superiority in modern warfare and highlighted the role of technological innovations like radar. But more than that, it showcased the resilience of a nation determined to fight on, even when standing alone against a powerful adversary. The shift in German strategy from targeting airfields to bombing civilian areas, the infamous Blitz, only strengthened British resolve. Far from breaking under pressure, the British people endured, their determination and unity unwavering. The consequences of the Battle of Britain were profound. It marked the end of Hitler's plans to invade Britain and forced Nazi Germany to shift its focus elsewhere. The victory not only bought Britain time to rebuild and rearm, but also sent a powerful message to the rest of the world. The Axis powers could be resisted, and they could be defeated. For the Allies, the battle was a beacon of hope in the dark early years of the war, a testament to what could be achieved through courage, innovation, and unity. The legacy of the Battle of Britain endures to this day. It remains a symbol of defiance, resilience, and triumph in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. As Winston Churchill so famously said, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." The RAF pilots, ground crews, and the British people who lived through the Blitz will forever be remembered as the heroes who stood tall when the world needed them most. If you enjoyed this look at the Battle of Britain and want to learn more about the key moments that shaped World War II, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Together, we'll continue exploring the stories that changed history.